Another person in his position would have long since given up. That was exactly what they wanted, to break the young King Jaime under the harsh conditions of his imprisonment. But he, confined within his cell, managed to keep his sanity against all odds. The fury boiling inside him fueled his strength. He knew that one day he would escape from this prison and once again don the crown that was rightfully his. This story began in the first half of the 14th century. King Jaime III of Mallorca and the Aragonese Princess Constanza welcomed the birth of their son. The boy was named after his father, and since he was the eldest son, he was immediately declared the heir to the throne. In the mid-14th century, Mallorca was a blessed and almost paradise-like place. King Jaime had managed to restore the economy of the once-ruined kingdom in record time, primarily through trade. The kingdom's favorable location allowed for connections throughout the Mediterranean, and soon the ports of Mallorca were teeming with ships. The kingdom traded in everything, and by some miracle, it managed to avoid a major outbreak of the plague, which only touched Mallorca lightly. Before long, King Jaime began minting his own gold coins. Naturally, the prosperity of his neighbor greatly irritated the kings of France and Aragon. The French king dreamed of reclaiming the lordship of Montpellier, which belonged to Jaime at that time. Meanwhile, Pedro IV of Aragon had even grander ambitions. The reality was that Mallorca was essentially a vassal kingdom. While it enjoyed a degree of autonomy, the ruler of these lands was required to pay homage to the King of Aragon. The reigning Pedro was known for his irritable nature, suspicion, and a penchant for revenge. It was extremely dangerous to jest with such a man, but Jaime of Mallorca was blissfully unaware that he was walking a tightrope. And so, the King of Aragon turned to Avignon, demanding that King Jaime be punished for his defiance. The pretext was Jaime's minting of gold coins, which Pedro believed undermined the royal monopoly. However, the Pope found Pedro's arguments unconvincing and took no action. In response, Pedro, leveraging his position as suzerain, ordered Jaime to appear in Barcelona for an inquiry. The King of Mallorca feared he would fall into a trap and did not respond to the summons. This disregard for his vassal duties sent Pedro of Aragon into a rage. He declared that from that moment on, he was stripping Jaime of all royal rights and placing Mallorca under his protection. Preparations for war began. The odds were stacked against Jaime. The Aragonese fleet and army vastly outnumbered Mallorca's military strength, and to recruit troops, Jaime even sold the lordship of Montpellier to the French king. For nearly 6 years, the conflict raged on until the King of Mallorca met his demise. Pedro IV proclaimed himself the ruler of Jaime's lands, and to ensure that no one could oppose him with a legitimate heir, he took the 12-year-old prince to Barcelona. Thus, Prince Jaime, more accurately, King Jaime IV, found himself in an iron cage. He managed to maintain his sanity through his hatred, which he nurtured, hoping to one day use it to triumph. Jaime exercised his mind daily, reciting previously learned Latin verses, foreign languages, geography, and mathematics. The guards, who had initially found amusement in the king's imprisonment, eventually began to treat him more humanely. Ultimately, Pedro ceased visiting his royal captive, and with that, some rules could be bent. Dreaming of escape, the boy turned into a young man. 13 years of confinement. At last, fortune smiled upon him. Jaime IV, King of Mallorca, fled. Loyal supporters of his father, whom he reached out to, provided him with funds and valuable advice. Seek allies beyond Aragon. Pedro had managed to alienate all his neighboring kings, and it was quite possible that someone would want to remove him from power. But Jaime went even further. He traveled to Naples. There, he presented himself at the court of Queen Giovanna, who had just buried her husband. Historians say he was handsome, and his tragic story added an air of martyrdom to Jaime. Queen Giovanna could not overlook such a striking man, so it came as no surprise when the King of Mallorca soon became her lover. A little later, he became her official husband. Giovanna set only one condition: Jaime could not lay claim to Naples. In return, he asked his wife for assistance in waging war. The war with Aragon, initiated by the king in the Iron Cage, ended in failure. Jaime even had to seek refuge on French soil. There, he unexpectedly encountered the English Black Prince, who surprisingly decided to support the claims of this monarch. Inspired by these newfound possibilities, Jaime once again charged into battle. However, upon arriving on the Iberian Peninsula, the king suddenly fell gravely ill. Weakened, he was captured by Enrique of Castile, who was waging his own war for power. Fortunately, his captivity was far more humane this time, thanks to Giovanna. She paid the ransom for her husband, who returned to Naples to regain his health. Queen Giovanna pleaded with Jaime to abandon further battles, and in this, she proved to be wiser than many. Aragon and Castile were locked in a fierce struggle for territory, with England meddling in their conflict, and in such a treacherous web, one could easily lose their life. But the King of Mallorca remembered the humiliation he had endured all too well, and was resolutely determined to continue his fight. The Aragonese forces dealt Jaime a defeat from which he could not recover. The King of Mallorca was forced to flee, eventually finding himself in Soria, where he died. It is likely that Jaime was poisoned, but one cannot rule out natural causes. He had been unwell for several years, a consequence of his prolonged imprisonment in the Barcelona jail. He left no children. The rights to the throne of Mallorca passed to his younger sister Isabella, who had once also fallen into the hands of Pedro IV and was simply sent to a convent. Isabella's fate was equally convoluted. She never took her vows, escaped the monastery, lived with various relatives, and was married several times. Around the same time that her brother died, this princess found herself in Paris and was in dire need of money. She simply sold her rights to the throne of Mallorca to Prince Louis of Anjou. This transaction allowed her to live comfortably in her own castle until her death.